Hey there, it's Ben Forehand. This is my art talk on Gothic architecture. Really, before we can get into Gothic architecture, we got to talk about its roots. And it all started with this man with the last name Sugar. He um, became the Abbey of St. Denis because he was dedicated to the Lord's service there at that church. And here's actually a picture of him, or the best we have. Um, yeah, that's about the best we're going to get of this man. And really, he began his education at this church where he was dedicated to the Lord's service. Um, and he had a super awesome series of fortunate connections to some people in high positions. And eventually, he became a counselor and friend to both King Louis the Sixth and Seventh. So he held a pretty prominent position. During this time, Sugar left his church and set out to build his own church in a new style, the Gothic style. He went on to also write about events that earned him an esteemed title of historian, even though that title kind of it came after his death, most likely because history isn't interesting until it is history. So he was known for rebuilding churches and rebuilding certain prominent places with this new style of architecture. But back in that day, it wasn't really called architecture. I mean, it wasn't called Gothic. It didn't really have a name back then. It was just architecture. The name didn't really come in until a historian named Vasari, who was a historian, got irritated that the architects in his era didn't want to revive classical architecture. So he tried to discount their style by calling it Gothic. Now, that word Gothic was actually an insult. And the reason why it was an insult, so we got to go back even further, is because the term Gothic came from the Gothic people who migrated into Europe and attacked the Roman Empire in 258 CE. The Romans were so impressed with their ferocious enemies that they recruited the Goths into military service. But whenever they, recruited them, the Goths could not be subdued even after they were converted to Christianity. So the Goths were an unruly, barbaric, crazy people. And they were not the Gothic people were not the inspiration of the architecture. The name Gothic just came as an insult from a historian that was trying to insult Sugar's architectural style. And coincidentally and ironically, the word Goth, which was used originally as a slam to this architecture, is now used to describe some of the most famous and brilliant architecture that people travel the world to see. So let's get on to the architecture, and I just want to point out a few main pieces of what makes this architecture so awesome. So this is one. This is another example. Here's another. And oh, sorry, I don't know how that got in there. But some interesting points that we will point out about this architecture, and here's a little diagram. Just a few things that we'll point out is these things called flying buttresses, and they're out here to the side, and they're these pillars that are on the outside of this building. These pillars, the flying buttress pillars, were the supports of the building. And instead of having just like nowadays, we hide our supports, right? Like in our walls, our 2x4, beams that we put on our walls support our walls, and they're kind of ugly. Well, back in this day, they said, why not make these supports beautiful? So these supports that are connected here to the building, these flying buttresses, are actually just as decorative and a part of the structure aesthetically as the structure itself. Another part that I want to point out are these windows here. These they're these certain windows that are really indicative of Gothic style and design, and they're pointed at the top, and it's in all the archwork, it's on all the windows. And lastly, there's so much to point out, but I'm going to end it with this. You see these circular pieces above the windows, and here's another piece, this giant circle of stained glass. These were called the oculus. And these oculus were these circle pieces of stained glass that let in massive amounts of light. And it's really cool because they get that word oculus from the what is it? the it's a word that comes from, I'll get it. The Latin word eye, the human eye. So just like the Bible says the eye is a window of our soul, these oculus windows were the window of the church that would let in the light and shed this beautiful light all throughout the temple. So pretty cool, awesome architecture, and there's so much detail to all of it. But that's my 6-minute presentation, and here is my works cited. I hope you enjoyed. I will leave you with this.